Welcome, everyone. We're going to give just a couple more minutes for people to come in to the space. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I see people coming into the space. Welcome to this webinar, Green and Just Transitions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sophia Lafontaine, and I work at Oxfam's U.S. Domestic Programs. Thank you so much for joining us for this urgent and timely conversation on Green and Just Transitions. This conversation is the second in a four-part series of our New Era for Black Women initiative, which covers issues that are impacting low-wage workers and communities, sponsored by Oxfam and the Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable. Our planet and communities stand at a critical juncture in the fight against the climate crisis. To avert the catastrophic impacts of climate change, including devastating floods, heat waves, droughts, fires, we must act quickly and dramatically to reduce global warming emissions. This fight is about safeguarding our health, protecting our environment, and ensuring a sustainable future for current and future generations. As we know, those with the fewest resources and who've done the least to cause this problem, particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, are hardest hit and suffer the worst consequences of climate disasters. All the while, rich countries and corporations continue to pollute and emit to maintain their wealth and power. Rather than stepping up to meet the moment, the US is on pace to expand fossil fuel production in the next decade, prolonging fossil fuel companies' stranglehold on our economy, on politics, and the environment. But the women you're going to hear from today are taking action and implementing solutions towards a clean and just energy future. To help steward our leaders in this conversation about this issue, I am so honored to introduce our illustrious moderator, Colette Pichon-Battle, co-founder and vision and initiatives partner of Taproot Earth. Colette is an award-winning lawyer and climate justice organizer. She's a trusted voice in the climate justice and Black liberation movements, and her work focuses on creating space for frontline communities to gather and strategize. As a generational native of Bayou Liberty, Louisiana, she's a 2019 Obama Fellow and is the recipient of many prestigious awards, including the 2023 Heinz Award for the Environment, the 2022 Catalyst Award from Rachel's Network, and the 2022 William O. Douglas Award. Colette is a former corporate lawyer. Internationally, she has gained recognition for her outstanding use of the legal and judicial process to achieve environmental goals. After 17 years of work leading the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy's development of programming focused on equitable climate resilience in the Gulf South, in 2022, she expanded her vision into Taproot Earth, inspired by her learnings with GCCLP and movement partners across the South. When she's not working to save the world, you can find Colette in rural Louisiana, spending her free time among the land, waters, and people who have poured into her love and nourishment since birth. Colette, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. What a beautiful welcome. And thank you for welcoming us to the second in the 4-part series of this conversation, very critical conversation. I would like to say thank you to all of the work that's going on behind the scenes and to the many women and Black women in particular who are working on behalf of their communities. And I'd like to start this conversation by briefly introducing each panelist and inviting her to join in the discussion by answering this question. Green and just transitions is a phrase that is thrown around a lot in environmental circles, but the public, the communities may not be familiar with it. What does it mean and what does it look like in practice? It's my honor to introduce Dr. Crystal Martin, founder of Greater Greener Gloucester. Crystal, how would you respond?
Hello. First, let me say thank you so much for this opportunity to amplify the voices of some of the people in my community. And thank you to Oxfam, the Black Women's Roundtable, and this phenomenal platform of Black women today. I want to give a special shout out right fast to my mom and to the amazing residents in Gloucester who trust me to lead them and who continue to tell their stories regarding the health issues and the environmental injustice that we face daily. Again, I am Crystal Nicole Martin. I am an educator turned environmental activist, and I lead the work for the Greater Greener Gloucester community. We are fighting to hold DRACs accountable for the multiple Clean Air Act violations. We intend to seek justice for the people and the damages associated with the air pollution problems. And we want to ensure environmental, public health, and quality of life improvements for the residents in the community. So as a leader, I bring my community along with me in this fight. And together, we are on the front lines advocating for a green and just transition because we want to protect the public health of our children, their children, and all the residents in the community. So for us, this green and just transition is about meeting with state and federal government to advocate for clean air and for laws to hold these industries accountable for their pollution. In May 2023, we collaborated with EPA Region 4 to host a community-wide meeting to talk about our concerns regarding air pollution. We were able to bring approximately 20% of our community to attend that meeting so we can share our concerns and for us so we can learn about this green and just transition that we need to get to. We shared our concerns with officials from EPA, MDEQ, USDA, Forestry, and other federal and state agencies. So for us, in order to get to a just transition, we have to work and we have to meet and we have to advocate with those who are at the tables to make decisions, to those who are in position to help us make the change, because we recognize as a small rural community, we cannot do this fight. We cannot do it alone. So the EPA was instrumental in helping us to draft what I call our initial document of advancing to a just transition. The EPA sat down and listened to the voices of the people in the community, and we were able to put together a document that talks about our desire to see a greater, greener Gloucester. As a result of that document now, or as a result of that meeting, we have been able to connect with people like Dr. Erica Walker and her community noise lab at Brown University. They're helping us to have a better understanding and helping us to advocate for a green and just transition that benefits our community, right? Based on what our desires and what our needs are at the time. So when I thought about what we're doing in practice, we are having those meetings, we are having those conversations. But in addition to the conversations, we are calling on action. We need to see action behind the conversations. So we are partnering with our state, federal government. And then we are also working with other community-based organizations such as NRDC, ECHO, Oxfam, Dogwood Alliance, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. All of these organizations, along with so many others, are working with us to advocate for cleaner air, greener jobs, more economic investment. We are asking for energy efficient homes, and we need laws that's gonna hold these industries accountable, and laws that actually protect the public health of the people. Not just say this is our mission, but actually help us to protect the public health of the people in our community. Yeah. So that's what we are doing on the front lines in practice to help transition to a greener, to a just and greener Gloucester.
I hear the action, I hear the accountability, I hear being at the table, really getting in there. Accountability was huge. And thank you for that introduction. Let's get a little more into that as we go. In the meantime, let's just introduce our second panelist, Ajulo Otho Esquire, who is the co-founder and CEO of Inner Wealth Solutions. Ajulo, what does the green and just transition look like in your neck of the woods, in your sector? What's that looking like for you? And I think we have Ajulo.
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize in advance that my internet is a little unstable. I should have.
You're good to go, Ajulo. I think we got you back now. Oops, or not. All right. Well, we're going to keep going. We'll get Ajulo back and we'll get a note from the tech once we come back in, but we can keep going. It's not just one, it's not just two, it's a whole crew of us. And so I next want to bring in our third panelist, Dania Davey Esquire, Senior Policy Advisor of the U.S. Southeast Region at Oxfam. Dania, what do green and just transitions mean and look like in practice? Can you come on in and join that conversation?
Thank you so much. And I just want to pick up the thread of where Dr. Martin left off. You elevated accountability. I think a huge opportunity that we have in having a green and just transition is that Black women have been on the front lines of this work for the entirety of the movement. I mean, if you go all the way back to the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, new communities right here in Albany, Georgia, the communities in Eastern North Carolina that were calling out industries for abusing Black rural communities. There's been a long legacy of Black women's leadership. And so I think a first step towards putting it into practice is financially investing and politically investing in Black women's leadership, and that Black women's best framework that has been applied by many women that have come before me. If we look at legislation from the perspective of the most oppressed, the most burdened, the most harmed by political inaction and economic divestment, we find the Black woman. And so the solutions politically and economically must be investments in Black women's leadership and insight in this space. I also think that community ownership and leadership of the industries, the renewable industries, and especially making sure that, as Ajulo's work is doing, making sure that rural and Black communities are growing their wealth in the new types of technology, the new types of grids, all of the ways in which our Southeastern and global Southern communities have been divested from, in the ways that put us on the front lines of climate change. Those are the very ways in which we can grow the wealth of the Black community. And I also think that the appropriations of federal legislation, the Justice 40 program of the White House that has set aside 40% of the financial investments in federal infrastructure and other pieces of federal legislation, those can't just stay as talking points of the administration. They have to really make their way into community leadership, community possession, and the decisions need to be made at that local level.
Thank you so much. I think this is, to keep hearing this local level, to keep hearing the participation at the community level, and even to keep hearing the role of the Black woman in this global, what sounds like new, but sounds like it might have been going for a long time, struggle for justice and equity and access. Sounds like we're moving things along. I thought we had Ajulo back, but I think she's still trying to connect. So we'll keep the conversation going, but I do want to just acknowledge that we want to hear a definition, but we also want to hear a little bit more, as was brought up, about this bringing in renewable energy, making sure that these rural communities are brought into the conversation. But while and we have Ajulo back right on time. Ajulo, we were just talking a little bit about what the just and green transition means, but I think it would be a great time to also ask you a little bit about your work in North Carolina, specifically how you came to the field, and why is this crucial for Black communities, in addition to what this green transition looks like. Can you jump in for us, and then we'll keep the conversation going?
Sure. My apologies for the technical difficulties, everyone. And I want to add my word of thanks alongside Dr. Martin's to Oxfam and the Black Women's Roundtable in Mississippi for the time today. As I look at the question of equity, there's sort of three areas that are most important to me, or that I pay particular attention to. And the first is around procedural equity, which is making sure that we have a voice at the table, that we understand who's participating in decision-making and who is not. The second area is around restorative equity, which is how do we use this moment to repair the damage that has been done historically from fossil fuel production. And then the third area that's of interest to me, in particular around my work in the solar industry, is around distributive equity, which is who's actually benefiting from this transition now and in the future. And while my work is really focused on this narrow slice of the transition, I am super focused on solar and how solar energy can be used to benefit families and communities more than simply in terms of bill savings, but also in terms of ownership and ownership of this vital sort of human need, electricity. All of those equity considerations are at play, even in this narrow slice of the transition. But compound those equity considerations, as Dr. Martin said, when you're thinking about energy efficiency, other forms of generation, electric vehicle access, it's not simply about the technology, but it's about applying these various procedural, regenerative, restorative, distributive equity aspects alongside that. This is a moment in history where it's once in a lifetime, it's generational, but in many ways, for our country, it's actually the first time where communities of color are positioned and policy is somewhat aligned to allow there to be a historic transformation in our economy for the benefit of people of color. Every other industrial transformation has kind of missed us, and none of them has had this focus on policy directed in the way that this current administration and the current policies are directed towards redressing historical injustices as well as creating greater benefit and economic opportunity going forward. So it is a moment, and I'm grateful to be in partnership with all of you all as we move towards the vision that we seek.
Well, let's keep talking about this aspect of public policy. I mean, we're in a moment where we're seeing, particular types of leadership take hold. We're seeing particular types of legislation come through. Dania, you specifically brought in some of the opportunities that we're seeing now. Let me pivot to you for a policy view on this, specifically around the Inflation Reduction Act. It was passed. It was arguably the most significant climate legislation in US history. At least $515 billion in public investment from the IRA alone, and more than 170,000 green jobs also have been created in the wake of the IRA, a majority of them in red states, some which have the largest and fastest growing Black populations in the country. What does it get right? What concessions were made? What issues does it not address? I know this has been a real concern in the South, right? All of the things that Ajulo said is right? Some of this stuff is historic. This is a moment. Also, sacrifices were made, concessions were made. What does this mean? What's your read on this one?
So I'm extremely excited about this piece of legislation, if it's not obvious from my enthusiasm. But one of the things that it really gets right is that in the EPA report, Climate Change and Social Vulnerability in the United States, they found that Blacks were 40% more likely than non-Blacks to live on the front lines. And that's because of redlining. That's because of a long history of the ways in which African-American land loss has been devised of by our own federal government and the interest of financial institutions and corporations. And so by looking at data and having data-driven legislation, as someone who's worked in this field of rural communities, working with Black farmers and Black co-ops for over 15 years, it's not frequently that we see legislation that really talks about the numbers and the ways that the numbers directly impact our disenfranchisement, our dispossession, and the ways in which we are at risk. And so I think that 40% and that number doesn't only pertain to African Americans. The right around 40% are the ways in which both Asian American, Indigenous, and Latin communities are impacted by the disproportionate impact of climate change. And so by setting Justice 40 as a whole government framework, we're really looking at the ways in which our entire federal government really needs to take a look at the ways in which these particular communities on the front lines really need to be invested in. And that's what equity is. I think a lot of times folks confuse equity and equality. And what we really need is when folks have been resources have been removed from a series of communities for generations, we have to make particular investments into those communities to help them get caught up. And so using data and putting those investments into the most vulnerable communities, that's what it gets right. Now, one of the problems that is occurring is that the time frame that we're facing, the reality is that we've gone so many decades, we've gone over 40 decades knowing that climate change was scientifically factual and disregarding that evidence, that now the damage is really urgent. And so all of the asthma, all of the lung diseases, all of the health diseases, all of the infrastructure degradation, the housing stock degradation, all of those things are now multiplied by what's happening in our environment. And so trying to get everything caught up and those investments made in a timely, urgent way while slowly slowing that process down enough to make sure that the fastest way to resolve it would be to give all the really bad polluters all the money and tell them to clean up their act, right? And so that's one of the things that we saw when the USDA was trying to get the climate smart commodities program up and going. Huge corporations got big amounts of money, and those communities on the front line just didn't have enough time to get their documents in order to get access to those resources. But now we have until November of this year for the climate change grants. And I really think that communities need to get as much information and as much conversations going amongst local leadership to make sure that those resources make their way from a federal construct into a local reality that's locally led.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. From that federal construct into locally led action. And we're back to action again, Dr. Martin. You're on the front lines, organizing and educating your community and decision makers about air quality issues in Gloucester. Can you tell us a little bit more about your community in Gloucester, Mississippi? And as you know, we really need to fully and hastily stop emitting greenhouse gases. Can we do it while centering communities? Is that even possible? Can you talk to us a little about that?
Yes, well, we'll go back to Gloucester. Gloucester, of course, is a really small rural town. We're located in Southwest Mississippi, approximately 2 hours south of Jackson, Mississippi. I tell people if you've ever traveled 55 south from Jackson to New Orleans, then you pass a town called Macomb, Mississippi. We are about 30 miles west of Macomb. So I always tell my friends, if you drive to Gloucester and you drive too fast, because we don't have too many markers, landmarks, but if you drive too fast, you will drive right past Gloucester. But we are approximately 900 people living in Gloucester. 80% of that population is Black, and 40% live in poverty. Unfortunately, we are a community that has been described as an environmental justice community. Again, we're small, we're rural. We're disproportionately affected by air and noise pollution. We are majority Black, high rate of poverty. Many of us are related. We are related by blood, by marriage. I tell people we even related by your baby mama family, your baby daddy family. But we are all some kind of way related, right? People in the Gloucester community are dealing with a lot of breathing and respiratory issues as a result of this air pollution, whether they know it or not. But we know it stems from the pollution. A lot of parents are reporting high rates of asthma and allergies in their children. We have many adults who are reporting high rates of asthma, chronic breathing issues, COPD, lung cancer. I got a call recently that quite a few people have kidney cancer. People are dealing with skin and eye irritation, dizziness, just to name a few of the issues that we are dealing with in our community. A lot of people have died from lung cancer, heart issues, and other forms of cancer in my community. So here we are, the Greater Greener Gloucester Project. We are just a small rural grassroots outreach education initiative that was established by my nonprofit K Martin Group and several residents from the community. This initiative began in response to the $2.5 million fine that was imposed against Drax biomass facility. We wanted to know why this company, Drax, why they had to pay this fine, which led us to finding out that the fine was the result of our air being polluted with hazardous air pollutants. I'm having to learn a lot of this so I can help educate my community. They kept talking about HAPs. I kept asking, what in the world are HAPs? Only to discover that it's not just air pollution that's in Gloucester. The federal government said we have HAPs, and these are hazardous air pollutants. So after we collaborated with other community-based organizations, and I just want to take a minute to shout out Rachel Mays from Southern Echo, because I share with people oftentimes we haven't given her enough credit for being there with us on the front line. She's a Black female out of Jackson who showed up for us during a really critical time. And that really helped us to amplify our voices. It helped us to come together as a community. So I just want to shout out Rachel Mays, because her work in Gloucester and her labor has not gone unnoticed. So with her help and the help of so many other amazing Black women, we started the Greater Greener Gloucester Project to help bring about this awareness and to help educate our people, our community on these issues that they were dealing with, and to talk about this facility and the air pollution, you know, the fine. We needed to talk about that with the people in our community. So today we are fighting as the Greater Greener Gloucester Project because we want to hold Drax accountable. We intend to seek justice for the damages that have been associated with the air pollution. And we want to ensure that we are not left behind, right? We're talking about this just transition, this Justice 40. We, at this point, we will not be left behind. And I share with people, years ago, we lost our school a long time ago, right after I graduated high school. I think it was the year I graduated, 1988, we lost around 1989. Our voices were not at the table then. So we intend to not be left behind this time. And that's why I tell people I had to return back to my community so I can help us in this fight to ensure that this time we won't be left behind. So we are fighting to ensure the public health and a better quality of life for the residents in Gloucester.
I hear that. And thank you, Dr. Martin. I think to ensure that future, right, to ensure a better quality of life, to keep that fight. And also really, you know, how do we stop this pollution? That, you know, hold accountable for what has been done, but how do we stop the pollution? Ajulo, there's a dot that rarely gets connected that Black folks deal with all the time. One is this impact that Dr. Martin is talking about, these policies that Dania has really shown us what the opportunities are. But then how are we talking about the new opportunities? What is that? How is the word getting out to Black communities about Black-owned solar and wind companies, or how to even enter that industry? We know we're being poisoned, we're being polluted. These things are happening. We know that there's even a federal construct to start to address this, but how do we connect the dots to this Black-owned solar and wind? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. You know, when I listened, one of the reflections I had, Colette, was way back in 2005, 2006, when you and I worked together in response to Hurricane Katrina at Oxfam. And one of the strategies was really around what are the economic development opportunities for peoples whose livelihoods are tied or contributing to their own vulnerabilities. And there wasn't always a good answer for that. One of the other reflections is that often in the work of rural development, communities have a vision and ideas about projects that they want to implement in their community, but then they have to go outside their community to actually get the technical resources to put the shovel in the ground, to do the engineering studies, put the capital together. And if you think about this historic investment, if we're not actually implementing the projects, then that $1 trillion will leak right out of our communities and be consolidated back into the hands of large multinational corporations that have zero accountability to our communities or interest in sort of recycling that money within community. So just one of many strategies is to try to bring folks together, people who are already in business, people who are aspiring entrepreneurs, people in roofing and other contractors, to say, this is a $1 trillion opportunity. What is it going to take to build your capacity to stand shoulder to shoulder with our community-based organizations to help them implement their vision. And so one of the outcomes of that for me was the creation of BOSS, which is Black Owners of Solar Services. It's an organization that brings together business owners to think about. And, one of the hurdles that I personally had to overcome was the relationship with capital and capitalism, recognizing that capitalism was a primary driver of vulnerability. Particularly for Black women.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet it is at the same time potentially a tool on the path to our freedom.
Ooh, girl, we're gonna have to talk about that one. I hear it. I mean, I think it's the challenge. I think this is definitely the conversation, the role of capitalism, not just in vulnerability, but in these systems that we're saying we need to change, right? And then there's a reality. Let's talk a little bit about the reality, and we're going to open it up to the audience in just a few moments. But for the last question, before we open it up to the audience, I'll invite any of the panelists to answer. The climate crisis and environmental degradation show us that we must end fossil fuel production. It's got to stop. We talk about a just transition, but what isn't said often enough is that the same companies extracting resources and polluting are also employers. If we were to end fossil fuel production today, are communities prepared to transition to renewable, sustainable energy sources? And what do they need to do to ensure there are green jobs in their community that can be trained or transitioned to? I mean, I think there are a lot of presumptions in this question, right? That we all have the same definition of green jobs, that we all have the same value of jobs, that certain jobs aren't, a lot of low paying jobs that blow you up are not necessarily the same as moderate paying jobs that can give you, a good life. So there's some nuances here with these questions and ways we define these things. But there's a broader question here, which is, are we ready? Are we ready for the transition? Are we ready to win? Are we ready to ensure that in this change, people are going to have what they need? I'm curious who wants to pop in on this, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Can I just quickly jump in?
Yes,
I'll be
yes.
super quick because, like you said, Colette, there's a difference between cost and value, and there's a difference between neoliberal version of success and the scarcity mindset that it drives, and the ways in which even Black women leaders have been put in positions of leading nonprofit organizations that are put in competitive modes against each other, when what we really need to do is goes back to what we've always done as a people, and that goes back to one of my sources of inspiration is the late Reverend Charles Sherrod, was a leader in the SNCC movement and one of the founders of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund. And he asked, when he was working with the Albany movement, what do we have? And at that time, that led to the first ever land trust. It was the largest and first land trust in America in Albany, Georgia, New Communities. And that was a Black-owned land trust. And so I do think that we have everything that we need. We have the expertise, we have the passion, we have the connection to the ancestors, and we have the connection to the land. And I think that one thing that gets mistold in the history of our enslavement is that we were actually agricultural engineers, and we really, our ancestry is really in building futures and building legacy. And so one of the challenges is that the way in which the tax credit structure for Justice 40 is set up is that those people who own multifamily businesses and own multifamily properties and homes and can purchase electronic vehicles, those folks are highly incentivized to get in on the front end of the green transition. And those of us in our community that are renters and tenants and maybe living in homes that just don't have access to a lot of the technology, even don't have access in some of our rural communities to internet, right? And that's a way that all of this information that's being disseminated is coming through the internet. And so a huge challenge is making sure that this process that is quickly advancing, and it seems like it's getting faster and faster as time goes by. It still needs to be slow enough to be at the pace of what our community can respond to. Our community, you've heard these experts on this panel, our community has the expertise, we have the land, we have the cooperative ventures, we know how to form co-ops. I think a huge opportunity for us is to have more tenant cooperatives, to have more Black-owned cooperatives in the same way that the rural electric companies, for the most part, don't have Black representation on their boards. Why don't we have a Black solar cooperative movement where we own the grid? There is a Native American wind grid that's being developed right now. I think that we can be positioned to be on the front lines. We have the engineers that can develop the microchips. All we need is the capital. And that is really the opportunity that I think Justice 40 gives us. And that's why I'm so excited that if we really come together and have these conversations in ways that are accessible to our people, to our elders in particular, we'll get all of the wisdom and the knowledge we need to take advantage of this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. Let me pull in the audience here and put one more question on the table. But I just want to say thank you to the panelists really for laying out some of the most poignant considerations of a green and just transition. Audience, now is your opportunity to participate in the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please use the raised hand function so that I can invite you to ask your question. Please remain on mute until I call your name. If you are unable to use the raise hand function or simply prefer to write your question, you can use the Q&A box or the chat. We'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can for the remainder of the webinar. So let me see. I can't see raised hands, but I think someone's going to help me with that. But I can see a couple of questions. Dania, I just want to say out loud, someone is looking for more resources on how to access this these federal dollars. And so hopefully we can get them, we said until November. I heard a deadline, November, let's get that stuff to the communities. And also a couple of folks have mentioned just, what are these products? What are these things that are being produced? We're clearly not just talking about energy, something's coming out of this. And so if any of us want to address that, that would be great. But we do have a hand raised from Jacqueline Quinn. Hey, Jacqueline, you want to ask your question, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, loud and clear.
Okay, just excuse me, I'm at work, but I wanted to make sure that I joined in, and I appreciate you ladies for having this panel and discussion. Dr. Martin is my first cousin, and she invited me, but I own a ranch here in Houston, Texas, and I had an episode where fracking was involved. And in that process, I have a water well system. And because I have a water well system, the fracking took place by a pipeline company that decided they were going to drill, which the pipeline goes under my home. And so when the fracking took place, I was very concerned because there was this brown peanut butter residue that came all over my property. And I'm very concerned about how it affects my health going forward, having a water well system and having to contact the environmental services, have them come out and test. They're saying, oh, everything's okay. But to me, it doesn't seem like everything's okay because there's different type calcium buildup in my pipeline from my water well system that's causing me to have to now spend more money on getting a I'm sorry.
It's okay.
A water treatment center system. So I wanted to know, is there and I know I did ask the question in the Q&A, is there a local, will you have a local chapters statewide where we can have someone from every state or have a place where we can go to have this conversation when we can't meet online, but there's someone you can sit down and talk to? who may also be able to, for my situation, come out to my land and test it, not like they tested, not like the company who did it tested it, but
Right.
the way it would give all the details, whether or not they have harmed my property in which I live and own.
Understood. Understood. Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline. And I think Dania Ajulo, I'm curious I'm hearing a few things, environmental injustice, Black-owned land, but also hearing, Dania, you made a reference to, nonprofits being able to do their own research or do their own, I think Ajulo mentioned, we don't have the space to do our own engineering and then the financing. It feels like a broader question about what's out there, what are the resources that are out there that folks can use? And if those resources aren't out there, what's the opportunity with this federal dollars to create the things that we don't have? Can either of you speak to that?
I'll start, Dania. I think I do want to echo Dania's point earlier, which is that we do actually have the experience and the resources. And this cooperative model is definitely one of them. The main thing that I think about when I think about energy generation is ownership. There is the technological ability for us to own energy generation and to benefit directly from it. And so I think that part of this is helping us all to understand that the way that energy was produced is actually changing. And it was changing before the Inflation Reduction Act. But now that public money has been put towards that shift, those public dollars are intended to help the most vulnerable. They are intended to help low-income households. They are intended to be a subsidy for communities that would otherwise not transition with the market. So these dollars are for us. And I think the more that we get that socialized within our community, the more we will find the resource. Colette, part of this we know is when you ask that question, where are the resources? How do I get connected? There will be an answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And there are more questions about resources in the chat. Shara asked, how can we get connected with this group so they can bring information to the rural community leadership? And there's a really good question by Maia in here. Maia is keeping it real. I hope I'm saying your name right. And it says, thank you so much for this conversation. My question is in response to the comments on the practicalities of a just transition. In addition to the dependency on some of these top emitters and transgressors for employment, talk about it, there is also often somewhat of a dependency for everyday living, e.g. on Amazon or similar corporations for household necessities. What are some ways to challenge or address these dependencies in this transition? How can we prepare ourselves in communities to adjust to such a transition? What a great question. That's one of those keeping it real questions. Thank you for that. I'm curious, Dr. Martin, do you have a thought on this? We're talking about the pollution. We're talking about the health of our community. We're talking about the future of it. And we are part of a consumer culture that is both polluting our communities and bringing an imbalance to the planet. How do we start to wrestle with this? How do you talk about this?
I was thinking about the industry in my community and just thinking, for us, we have industry, but they don't hire the people in our community. Again, we are a very small rural community. So we really don't have the workforce capacity. We don't have industry. We don't have, we're not really close to colleges or places where our residents can go and get workforce training. Nobody's investing in our community. Nobody is investing in our people to ensure that they have what they need to work at big industry. So for us, it's like we are being pimped, prostituted, or whatever in my industry, that's in my community. Nobody's there taking care of us, right?
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go to London, where I had the opportunity to meet with the CEO of the company. And I got a chance to speak in their shareholders meeting. And they looked at me and said that I asked the question, how many people actually work in your facility? Like, I want to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
And they told me 72. They said, but 49 come from Gloucester. You cannot imagine what went through my mind. 49 people out of Gloucester, Mississippi. You're telling me work in that facility. So we've been asking around. We have asked so many people. We have yet to get past maybe 5 that we can count. And they said that these people live within a 4-mile radius. So for us, the industry is not investing in our people, not making sure that we have a workforce that's ready to for those jobs. So even with we talking about a just transition, even if we bring in industry, right? Even if we bring in green industry, we need the investment in people first, right? We need people to be trained. We need people to be skilled so they can get the jobs. And right now, that's just not happening. We need leadership. It's unfortunate. We are a small rural community, but we lack leadership. We need leadership who are compassionate about people. We need leadership who are concerned about making sure that we can transition to a more green and just industry or community. Nobody, in my opinion, we have no local leadership that's concerned. So our fight is a little different because we just don't have that on the ground.
But we do have you, and I see you on the ground. It might not be
I'm on the ground. I'm doing it all, and it's tough.
Yeah, and I think let's acknowledge the number of women fighting for their communities, fighting against multinational corporations, traveling and speaking truth to power and bringing people together. But we also have to acknowledge that I think what you're saying is real. People have to be able to work in these industries, and the education system in my state of Louisiana, your state of Mississippi, across the red states, is not built to develop critical thinking, independent creativity. It's built to serve a system that was meant to enslave us. Let's be clear about what we're training people to do. And how do we do this differently? How can we think about our financial systems, about our energy systems, about the systems of resources that we need in a way that does not uphold the oppression that is required to get this kind of profit and loss margin, to get these kind of wealth divides, to get this kind of opportunity for the haves and have-nots. So let's talk about this. I just want to, I see you coming in, Daniel. Let me just say to the audience, if anyone else would like to raise your hand, we're reading out of the Q&A. So you can feel free to post in the chat, or raise your hand and we'll come to you. Daniel, over to you. Look like you wanted to get in on that one.
I did, because I want to just amplify a concern that a Black forester, my good friend Freddie Davis from the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, has expressed to me. And what they do is they go out and they help Black folks manage their forest at no cost. And a lot of times, I'm a Black lawyer, several of us are Black professionals. A lot of times our community shies away from employing us and supporting Black businesses, or they want to support us in ways that don't allow us to afford our livelihoods and our lives. And so I think that one thing that we do need to look at is, coming out of the pandemic, Black women are essential in so many roles and so many opportunities that the community has. We have those experts, we have those folks, there's cooperative extension is one community resource that I think that folks are not aware of. Someone mentioned testing and finding out about other government resources, the land grant university in your local community, the EPA has technical assistance providers. I put the link in the chat that are in their different regions that you can go to with questions, not just about the change grant process, but also environmental justice concerns. There's a National Environmental Justice Council that meets monthly. There's a call for that. There are so many resources, and I think that a challenge is we're so we have to put out all the fires at all the times, and there's just so much urgency going on around us. And so one thing that I've tried to do is to develop a newsletter through USDP, the domestic programs of Oxfam, to send out just kind of a concentrated list of what those information sources and resources are for our community, because there are folks that are poised to provide workforce training. I know that there's several Oxfam partners that do workforce training. One of those is the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, and they've been doing workforce training since Katrina. And so I just wanted to amplify that when I say that we have everything we need, one thing that we need to realize is there's no group that has an advantage in a just transition. Since the Industrial Revolution, humanity has relied on fossil fuels. And so as Black folks who have a particularized understanding of underinvestment and making something out of nothing, I'm originally from Jamaica. I was thinking about it this morning, how we've been recycling since before it was like a thing. I think that's just like a part of being Black in this world. And so we have so many innovations. We just never had the resources. We just never had the financing to make sure that those businesses could be in our communities. And we know what happened with Black Wall Streets. So I just want to amplify and assert again that these resources that we finally have a chance to access can make the difference between our ideas and implementing those solutions for our communities.
And let's talk about the solutions. I want to bring in Dove's comments. They live in an apartment building. What resources are available to us? And I want to say what I hear from that, which is if we're talking about solar and wind, right? Not everybody has a farm or a ranch, shout out to the ones who held on to it and the ones who do, but a significant number of Black folks live in apartments, live in these urban settings. What do they have available to them, Ajulo, specifically when it comes to solar, wind? How do we think about this in that regard? Can you speak to that in our last couple of minutes?
Sure I can. So just, briefly in response to that question, despite the fact that we have a significant amount of resources, we are also constrained by our regulatory environments. And so, for instance, if you are in the Southeast, we unfortunately are not able to take advantage of things like community solar. So we have to think about ways to be more creative in the way that we design our projects so that people can directly benefit from them. And the cooperative ownership model is one way to do that. The other piece I wanted to bring in related to Dania's comment is that as Black women, we adapt. And there will be a significant amount of change, not just in the natural environment as a result of climate change, but also from a policy perspective with the rollbacks and the outward oppression of people of color that is increasing. The idea that we can have programs or initiatives that are specifically designed for Black and Brown people is under legal attack. It not only is it getting rolled back, but it's becoming illegal. So it behooves us as Black women to think about how we adapt in this new environment. And that is one of our, our superpowers. We do this.
Yeah, I like that. Hashtag we do this. Hashtag we do this. Sophia, I hate to end it here, but I do want to thank the panelists and Sophia call you back in to say we didn't finish. We got more to talk about. I hope y'all doing another round. I hope this ain't it. We hope we're number 2 and 4. We hope that there's more good conversation, but I'll turn it over to you with my deep thanks and respect to all of the panelists today, and for having this conversation and for starting, raising, and centering Mississippi. If we don't have Mississippi, we do not win. Ashe. Over to you, Sophia.
Wow. Thank you all so much for this really rich and dynamic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, spending an hour with us. I want to thank our moderator, Colette, our amazing panelists, Dania, Dr. Martin, and Ajulo. You all have my deepest gratitude. You're doing the work and you're doing it beautifully. Just thank you everyone for joining us. We all have the power, as we've talked about, not only to adapt, but to create a just and equitable future for everyone. A clean energy future, a future that we deserve, that prioritizes the care of our communities over the pocketbooks of billionaires and millionaires and these fossil fuel companies. The way forward is clear. We need a decisive break from the fossil fuel infrastructure, and we just need to embrace clean energy alternatives that are at our disposal. Please scan the QR code on the screen if you can. Sign the petition to stop dangerous gas emissions. We are going to be coming back for our 3rd round of webinars on June 13th. But before that, we are going to have a very special webinar that our campaigns team is running on methane gas on June 3rd. Please join us for that. Join that call to action. It's going to be on June 3rd at 8 p.m. We will be following up with all of you with additional resources and a thank you email by tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us and spending time with us.